What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 28 preview, and I'm going to start off by talking about captaincy. Now, this is the list I put together of who I think the best options are, starting with the best at the top. But I will say it was very difficult to split Saka and Kane, and I'll talk about why I've got them the way around that I do in a minute. But if you're looking at it thinking Saka's not the best option, it's definitely Kane. That is who you should go for, because they're both great picks for Game Week 28. In terms of splitting them, in the past, you'd probably look at that and think, well, Kane's the one with penalty, so I'd just go for him. But obviously, Saka is first choice penalty taker for Arsenal now as well, so that doesn't split them. They're both nailed on for starts and both nailed for pretty good minutes as well. I guess you could argue, if the game is going really well, who's likely to come off first, Saka or Kane? It's probably Saka, but generally they both get 80 to 90 minutes in most matches. So then you look at the opposition. Kane has got Southampton away. Now, Southampton have conceded 1.29 expected goals per 90 minutes so far this season. So nothing special. They're not really a great defence. But Arsenal have got Crystal Palace at home, and they've conceded 1.37. So over the season, they have been worse at limiting the opposition's chances. And if I think about both teams going forward, do I really think that either side is going to start defending any better than they have been? Not really. So Crystal Palace on paper does look like the better fixture, and it's at home for Arsenal, whereas Spurs have got to go away to Southampton. So fixture-wise, I think Arsenal just about win it. And when you look at them on an individual level, Kane's goal threat is higher, 0.44 expected goals per 90, 0.28 for Saka. Saka does do a little bit better in the creativity department, but he is also a midfielder, so when he does score, there's an extra point there for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet, and Crystal Palace attacking-wise have been really poor recently as well, so there's definitely a chance to get that. So I don't think there's much to split them. The reason I've got Saka is because he's a midfielder. That is basically it. It's just much easier for them to haul because they don't need necessarily as many returns when you start adding in the extra points for the goal and the clean sheet. But you could look at it and think, well, hang on a second, Kane's goal threat is much higher. He's much more likely to score. Southampton's not a great defence either. I'm just going to go for him. And you know what? I wouldn't really argue against you. I'm just going to go for Saka because, like I said, it's quite hard to split them. So I'm just going to go for the midfielder. I feel like the next best option has to also be an Arsenal midfielder, given how well they've been playing recently and the home fixture. I've gone for Odegaard because I just think he's the best option in terms of minutes. I think Martinez will probably be very good again for Game Week 28, but when you look at the underlying numbers, expected goals, expected assists, not a lot to split them this season, and Odegaard's minutes are definitely more secure, so that's why I've gone for him. If you want to go for Martinelli instead, that's absolutely up to you and perfectly fine. And then you've got three more penalty takers, Toney, Watkins and Havertz. They're all playing in pretty good fixtures. Interestingly, I look at the fixtures on paper and think Bournemouth is probably the best one, but so far this season they're at 1.49 expected goals conceded, which is really bad, but both Leicester and Everton are at 1.57, so are both worse. And when you think about it, right, have Leicester got any players back recently which are going to make a big difference? Like Ricardo Pereira is back now. Is he going to suddenly stop Leicester conceding so many goals? I don't think so. I think there's bigger problems there. And Toney has the highest goal threat out of all of those three forwards I've spoken about. So that's why I've put him higher. He can't be banned for Game Week 20. Oh, sorry, he can be banned, but I don't think it's going to happen. He can't be suspended through yellow cards for Game Week 28. So there's no issues there either. So I think he's probably slightly better than Watkins. And I do like that Bournemouth at home fixture. And then I've put Havertz last. So that's probably the top six. You could definitely start including players like Chilwell in this conversation if you're happy to go for a defender, but I hate captaining defenders, so I usually stick to attackers. So that's the list I've come up with. Saka at the top, very close with Kane. They're definitely the best two this week. Let me know below who you're going for. Alright, so is it worth tripling up on Brighton midfielders with all the remaining double game weeks that they have? And just a reminder, if Brighton or Man City get through the next round of the FA Cup, Brighton would have 4 double game weeks before the end of the season. And at a minimum, they've got 3. So a double up or a triple up on Brighton players in general looks pretty good. There are obviously other positions. So Evan Ferguson as a forward, Estupiñán and Dunk in defence, and Steele as a goalkeeper, if you are happy about his minutes, are all options. But you could look at a triple up on the midfield. It's not completely out of the question. And even if you've got a preference of who the best Brighton midfield pick is, in isolation they're all decent options. If you said to me I'm buying Solly March, I'd say great, he's a good pick. Same with Matoma, same with McAllister. So you could triple up if you wanted to. The issue comes that they possibly block other midfielders that you might want to bring in your team. And funnily enough, I thought about this a lot for my own team yesterday, because I am considering taking Estepinian out for game week 28 and just replacing him with McAllister instead and actually tripling up on Brighton midfielders. So if you do that, right, and I'm going to explain why you may or may not want to do it. Let's just say I do Odegaard to McAllister. Look, Odegaard's a good option, but going forward, he's not going to be essential or anything like that. I just need to get rid of Estepinian because it doesn't like that I've got four Brighton players, which I would probably go for if I could. So just ignore the rest of the team. We're only concentrating on the midfield. Now, Rashford and the Brighton midfielders have got a double in 29, and they're all very likely to double in 34 and 37 because Man United already have a fixture against Brighton to rearrange, and if they beat Fulham in the FA Cup, they'll also blank in game week 32, which means they'll have that Chelsea game to rearrange as well. So Man United have got a double in 29, Everton at home and Forest away, possibly a blank here. So depending on what chips you want to use will depend on whether you can really go for triple Brighton midfielders. But if you're going to free hit in 32, well, they've got decent fixtures till 31. Okay, Spurs away is not ideal, but it's a double in 34, West Ham away, Wolves at home, and another double in 37, and Fulham at home to end the season. So in an ideal world, you could definitely just get Man United players in for 29 and just hold them for the rest of the season. Obviously, loads of other stuff will happen because this is FPL. In an ideal world, you could do that. Now, Saka is great, and we're not going to discuss whether or not to sell him this week. We'll leave that for 29. But after game week 29, where they've only got a single game week, they've got Liverpool away and West Ham away. And look, Arsenal have been brilliant so far this season. They can definitely beat both of those teams. Saka could get returns, but I wouldn't say he's essential for those games. And if you're free hitting in 32, you can get him back anyway. And 33 and 34 is Man City away and Chelsea at home. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you're happy to get rid of Saka as well. Well, you'd possibly go and get Bruno Fernandes, right? Now, Fernandes is someone that we're going to talk about later because I know Casemiro is out and stuff like that. But again, for argument's sake, let's say he's a good pick from 29 for the rest of the season because of the good single game week picks, but also the amount of double game weeks that Man United will probably have. Well, that midfield seems okay then. You've got 5 players where they're very likely the Brighton ones to double 4 times and the Man United ones to double 3 times, and they've got fairly good single game week fixtures. You could say for Brighton in particular, the ones in 30 and 31 are not great. 2 away games to Spurs and Chelsea, but also the Brighton attack is very good, so they will cause those two teams problems. And again, you'd be free hitting in 32. If you're not free hitting, it does make it a lot trickier to go with this kind of strategy. And then afterwards, they got good single game week fixtures and doubles anyway, right? But what happens when you get to game week 34 and Liverpool are probably going to double with Fulham at home and Spurs at home? Are you going to want to get Salah in here? And how would you do that? You could just swap Fernandes to Salah. That would be easy. But what if you want to keep your Man United midfielders? You got to get rid of a Brighton one anyway. So I know it's a long time in the future to be thinking, but this is kind of the conclusion that I came to, that it looks good. But when you get to game week 34, it gets very difficult to get Salah in this team. And you might not want to go for him. And right now you probably don't, especially after the result against Bournemouth and the missed penalty. But when double game weeks come, they always change your thinking. So if you want to get Salah into that team, you've got to think how to do it. Whereas if you didn't have that third Brighton player and you just had them in defence like I had previously, then you've got a spare slot to play with. Again, it's still going to be hard to have Haaland and Salah and maybe a Liverpool defender and Fernandes anyway, because budgets is going to be a bit of a constraint. But that's what you've got to think about. What spots is it going to mess up for you instead? Because even if you didn't want Salah, right, and you've got Saka here, well, if you want to get Fernandes into this team, who do you drop? Do you drop one of the Brighton players with loads of doubles? Do you drop Rashford, who's great value and no one wants to sell anyway? Probably not. So then you've still got to sell Saka. If you wanted to keep Saka and have Fernandes, well, then you've got to drop one of the Brighton midfielders. So that is basically what you need to think about. In their own right, in isolation, they are all good picks, and therefore you can make a case to triple up on them. But then they're taking up 3 of your midfield spots. You've only got 2 more to play with. How many players over the next few weeks are you going to want instead? That's what to think about. Not trying to put you off. I actually think it could work. But for me, I just don't think I'm going to go for it. So lots of people thinking about this. Is Bruno Fernandes still a good pick for double game week 29 after Casemiro's red card? And I think the short answer is yes. He's still a good pick, especially if you've already wildcarded. And part of the reason is what's to come after double game week 29. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Obviously, Casemiro being out is not good for Man United in general. He's suspended for 4 matches. He's going to serve one of them in the FA FA Cup, so he's going to miss both games in double game week 29 and the Everton at home fixture in game week 30. So do I think it makes Bruno Fernandes in general a worse option? Yes, but not by enough where he suddenly becomes a bad FPL pick. The bigger issue is where Fernandes is now going to play, because generally Man United on paper line up with a 4-2-3-1, so they've got that pivot, and Fernandes usually plays as a 10 or off the right hand side, and sometimes players change position. It's quite fluid in games, but usually Fernandes is a number 10 or he's playing off that right hand side. But as we saw against Southampton, he played a little bit deeper, and Ten Hag has said that he could play that role. Now usually in the pivot it's Casemiro plus one other player, very rarely is it Bruno Fernandes, but that has happened recently, and Ten Hag has said he can play that role. So while Casemiro is out, which is for the next 3 Premier League fixtures, could Fernandes play there again? Yes, it is a possibility, and if that happens, he is then a worse option, right? I guess the question is, how likely is that to happen? I've got to be honest, I'm not really sure. I suppose against Southampton, there was a big chance of Man United having a lot of balls, so perhaps that's why Ten Hag wanted Fernandes there. Now, if you're looking at Newcastle away, are they going to have a lot of the ball? Possibly, but I would suspect that he might play 2 of 3 of Fred, McTominay or Sabitzer, and probably similar against Brentford. I don't know if he would go in to either of those fixtures with Bruno Fernandes in that position. I could be completely wrong, and if you're a much better tactician than me, leave me a comment below and let me know what you think. If I'm looking at the next 3 games thinking which one will Bruno Fernandes play deeper, I guess it would be Everton at home, but it could be that he doesn't play that role against any of those teams. So I think if you've already used your wild card and you're thinking about getting Fernandes in, you're getting a double game week in 29, you're getting Everton at home, which is a good fixture, Nottingham Forest away is decent. You have to decide what you're going to do in game week 32, because each of us have now got different chips available. There is a chance that he will blank in 32, so you've got to be ready to be able to free hit or possibly transfer him out. 33 is Spurs away, not a great fixture, but 34 should be a double game week. Then it's West Ham away, Wolves at home, and if Man United have beaten Fulham in the FA Cup, they will have 2 double game weeks after 29 in 34 and 37, and game week 37 already has Bournemouth away. So even if it was Chelsea at home that went into that week, that's still a pretty good double, and to end the season they've got Fulham at home. So if you've used your wild card, obviously you've still got transfers to be able to make, but for some of your picks you don't want to have to be bringing them in, taking them out, bringing them in, taking them out, especially with so many good fixtures and double game weeks to come. So I think you risk, if he was in your plans anyway, you risk that he doesn't play in that position in any of these fixtures, or if he does, they get a penalty or something like that, and then you've got him ready to go for all the good fixtures afterwards. I think if you've already used your wildcard and you're free hitting in 32, Bruno Fernandes is still a good pick. If you're someone that's looking to wildcard later, possibly game weeks 30 or even 33, then you could just decide not to go with him, hope that with Casemiro out he is a worse option, and then get him in for the doubles and the good single game week fixtures later on. There's a couple of ways you can play it, but I will say, as someone that was planning to get Fernandes in, right now my plan is still to get him. I will say that I'm not kind of set on what to do in game week 28, and game week 29 is a long way away. We've got an international break and everything yet, but right now I still think I'm going to pick him, but mostly because of the double in 29 and everything after that. Obviously, if Man United lose against Fulham, it's a little bit different because they would play in 32 and have 1 less double game week. So we can revisit that conversation in game week 29 itself, because the FA Cup matches would have finished. But I wanted to cover this question now because it might affect how people make their transfers in game week 28, for example. So this is a good question because a lot of people are buying Ben Chilwell this week. I've already said that I'm thinking about it too, but I've also said if both players were fit, I think Reece James is a slightly better FPL option. So would you pick James over Chilwell for game week 28 if Potter says he's fit to play? And I guess there is a possibility that I would, especially with the international break coming up straight away after, because I don't think either of these players are going to play both games for England. Now, I don't know if we've had the squads released yet, but Ben Chilwell's got Luke Shaw as competition, and right now for England, Luke Shaw is probably ahead in the pecking order. Right hand side is a little bit different because you've got Trent, Trippier, James among others, but Trippier could definitely play instead of Reece James, so I don't think he's going to go and play both games for England. So they should get a bit of rest and then be back for double game week 29. So unless they pick up an injury, you'd expect them both to have pretty good minutes going forward. And I guess that is the key question question. Who do we think is the fitter of the two and likely to get more minutes? Now, recently, and I've said this already this week, Chilwell has proved his fitness more than Reece James. Reece James has missed 3 of the last 5 Premier League games. If you go back a little bit further and we look at the starts in the last 8 fixtures, there's no real reason why I chose 8 fixtures, by the way. I just went back a little bit further. Reece James has started 5 times and Chilwell 6, so there's not a huge amount in it. And the reason that I prefer James from an FPL point of view is the numbers that you're seeing on screen. So this season itself, higher expected goal involvement than Chilwell. Last season, where obviously Chilwell was out for quite a while, but still much higher for Reece James, 0.44. Bearing in mind that part of that drop-off this season is because they haven't always been playing with wing-backs, whereas they were before. And before that, they were either equal or Reece James was slightly ahead. So if you tell me right now they're both going to play every game from 28 to 31, I would pick Reece James, right? Because I think he is slightly better. But I don't know if I'm as convinced with his fitness going forward. So if Graham Potter says he's definitely fine for 28, you could go there. It's just the worry is from 29 onwards. And I know both players have missed quite a lot of football recently, but Ben Chilwell has now played back-to-back games in Premier League and Champions League. And they do have competition for that left-hand spot with Cucurella, but Graham Potter doesn't often play him as a left wing-back. He has done it in the last 8 games because I double-checked, but generally it's not a position he plays him in. He either plays him left-back in a back 4 or left centre-back in a back 5. He doesn't like playing him in that wing-back position. It was exactly the same at Brighton. If you go and look at Cucurella's last season under Potter at Brighton, very rarely played as a wing-back. I just don't think it's kind of what his skill set is matched to. So right now, I'm saying Chilwell. If Potter says James is fine, it does become a little bit of an issue because he's also 0.1 million cheaper. But I think given what's happened in recent games, I'll probably go for Chilwell because as much as I think James is a better pick when they're both fit, it's not like Chilwell is bad either. So I think I'd probably go for the safety. And for what it's worth, I'll talk about this in team selection tomorrow. I'm actually considering going for both of them because I think they're that good and just worth the possible risk going forward. But I'm going to stick with Chilwell, but there is a conversation to be had about James if Potter says that he's fit. So let's talk about Leicester. They got Brentford away in game week 28, a double in 29, and Bournemouth at home in game week 30. So fixture-wise, things look pretty good over the next 3 game weeks. Iheanacho is getting a lot of attention given they have a brilliant double game week in 29, but Leicester are in really poor form. Do you just go with Maddison instead, even though there are injury concerns? Now, there has been a lot of talk about him carrying a knock, and if you look at his recent games, he did miss out against Arsenal at home in game week 25, but he also played 89 minutes against Chelsea, 90 against Southampton, 90 against Man United in game week 24, and 87 before that. So if the knock is that bad, you think he would have come off a little bit earlier in those games. Maybe they can't risk it because of the position they're in the league. But ultimately, I think unless Brendan Rodgers says there's an issue there this week ahead of Brentford, I think Maddison is okay to go for. What are your thoughts on Leicester generally? So if we look at the league table, they're not doing great. They've lost 4 of the last 5 games. They're sitting in 16th place on 24 points, only 2 points ahead of Southampton, who are rock bottom of the league. So it's not great for Leicester whatsoever. But I think when you're looking at players for FPL, you mostly have to look at them on an individual level, right? And part of the problem with Leicester is how bad they are defensively. We're not looking at bringing defenders in, right? We don't want Ricardo Pereira, Castagna, Danny Ward and players like that. So we're really looking at Maddison and Iheanacho, like I said, on an individual level. And I've gone for full-on video production here and just put their numbers on a Google Doc to show you. So Maddison is at 0.25 expected goals per 90, 0.33 expected assists. And Iheanacho is 0.53 expected goals, 0.36 expected assists. So both really good players. I will say Iheanacho's numbers come from a much smaller sample size, so you would expect them to come down a bit. But historically, he has been very good. So I think he is a decent option going forward. And we will compare him to other players in a minute outside of Leicester. But if you're looking at that, if they continue those numbers, the FPL returns will come. It's not an exact science. It doesn't mean it'll be in 28 or 29. It might not even be until next season where they get the rub of the green. But they are creating chances and they are getting good, decent chances to score as well. So Iheanacho, for example, very unlucky to not get more against Southampton. In the last couple of games, Maddison has put in some great balls, just hasn't got the assists that you would usually expect. So looking at those numbers alone, I like them. The only reason that this form should be a worry is if you think it's going to affect the team in general or affect those two players. Do you think the fact they're sitting in 16th means they're going to start creating less chances or getting less shots on goal? I would say probably not. Maybe when you get towards the end of the season and you're still in a relegation battle, maybe the nerves come. But I think those two players are pretty good. The only question is whether they're good for FPL in general. So for Maddison, obviously he's fighting against other midfielders. The double in 29 is pretty good. Palace away and Villa at home. Then it's that Bournemouth game. The issue, I guess, is the Man City game in 31. But after that, even though they've got no double game weeks, the single game week fixtures are mostly good. So you could argue that Maddison is a good pick. I guess he's up against Rashford, Fernandes, all the Brighton midfielders, Saka, maybe Salah at some point. And again, some of you might not want Salah now, but Liverpool probably going to have that double in 34, and the fixtures in 31 and 32 are Leeds away and Nottingham Forest at home, so they're definitely worth looking at. So it's whether or not you want to take up a midfield spot with Maddison, but in the short term, 28 to 30, I think he looks really good. With Iheanacho, I think his price is brilliant. He's only 6.1 million. The fixtures are obviously exactly the same as Maddison, so they're decent. The only concern is his minutes, and will at some point he not start? That could happen. That's the only thing that I'm worried about. He has been starting recently. He hasn't not played since game week 22. So since game week 21. So since game week 22 till now, he started every game. Now his per 90 minute numbers are very good, but he doesn't often get to 90 minutes. In fact, he's only done it once since game week 22. But for 6.1 million, he's still a good option if you think he's going to start going forward. I just think for the forward players you could go for 3 spots, there is again a lot of competition. So most people, whether or not they're selling Haaland this week, they're going to want him back. So that's one spot. Ollie Watkins again is a big favourite, absolutely nailed on, decent minutes, really good fixtures as well. So that could be another one. A lot of people have still got Tony until he's suspended or banned. You've got Harry Kane in the mix as well. People are talking about Havertz, João Felix. Does Iheanacho fit into those spots? Possibly, but you'd really want to be confident about his minutes going forward. And what I will say for anyone that's already wildcarded is I think it makes the picks a bit more, what's the word that I'm looking for? I think it's a bit more important to get those nailed on players because you don't want to have to be dealing with them later, especially with more double game weeks to come. If you've got your wildcard left, maybe you can go a little bit riskier, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter because you're going to wildcard them out later as well. But that is one of the reasons I just don't know if I can bring myself to go for Iheanacho, because if he misses a game, then I'm suddenly worried he's going to miss the next game. Then I've got to think about transferring back out. Whereas I know that Ollie Watkins, for example, isn't that exciting, but I know that he's going to play every single game and get 80 to 90 minutes in most of them as well. So thoughts on Leicester generally, very bad. Do I think that matters massively for FPL? No. I think Maddison and Iheanacho are good players individually, but I think for both of them, there are other players that you could go for. Maybe more so for Iheanacho than Maddison. It really depends on how long you want to keep them. All right, so what do you think about multiple hits? Maybe even a -8 or a -12 to go from 8 to 11 players in game week 28, especially if the players added are game week 29 doublers and good long-term picks. And generally, I think this sounds pretty much okay. Obviously, it would be easier to answer if I knew which players were being removed and which ones were being brought in. But I appreciate for a video like this, we've got to keep it a bit broader. But ultimately, if you're removing someone without a fixture and the player you're bringing in does have one, you'd hope that's 2 or more points straight away for game week 28 alone. Then they've got an extra fixture in 29 and are a good long-term pick. I just don't see why in most cases you wouldn't take that hit. Obviously, everyone's team is different right now. So does my team need a -8 or a -12? Absolutely not. But I've just wildcarded, so you'd expect that to be the case. If you are someone that's wildcarded a few weeks before that, or even you're trying to save it until later, you might need more hits, and that's perfectly fine. Just because I don't need the hits now, I probably will later on to cover the rest of the doubles, where you're taking yours now and you're wildcarding later instead. So it was hard to think of many examples where you absolutely need to take some hits. But for one example, Fulham aren't playing this week. So let's say you've still got Mitrovic for some reason. You could absolutely take him out for someone like Watkins. Great fixture this week, double in 29 and a really good fixture in 30. While Mitrovic will have a double later on, he's not really needed right now. So for me, that would be worth a hit. Likewise, if you've got someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, you could possibly make a case to take him out for a hit because no fixture, a really horrible double for defenders in 29. It's Chelsea away and Man City away. Then they've got to play Arsenal at home. So someone like Salah might be okay to hold because if he loses the clean sheet, whatever, you're hoping that he gets some attack and returns. But a defender, yes, you might want Liverpool players long term from like 32 onwards because they play against Nottingham Forest in the blank. They will probably double in 34 as well. You know, maybe you'd want him longer term, but right now you could possibly justify using a hit on him and then maybe looking to bring him back later. So there are players that are missing out this week that you could definitely remove, and there's a lot of good players or a lot of teams that have a good fixture in 28, a double and a good fixture in 30. So Aston Villa are definitely one of them, Leicester another one as well, and even Newcastle players. Game in 28, double in 29, and they'll have another double to come when that Newcastle-Brighton match gets rearranged. So I think in a lot of cases it's probably fine, but obviously, as always, the cop-out as a content creator is very team dependent, and if you've just wildcarded in 26 or 27, you probably don't need a -8 or a -12. Either way, let me know what you think about everything I've talked about today in the comments below. If you enjoyed that video, give it a like, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again soon.